Imagine a man standing waist-deep in human waste, scraping the bottom of a medieval cesspit with a wooden shovel. He reeks of death and filth, yet he earns more than most craftsmen in the city. The Middle Ages were not a world of knights and glory. They were a world of work, brutal, filthy, and sometimes shockingly profitable. From the men who cleaned the sewers to those who lent gold to kings, let us uncover the highest-paying jobs of the medieval era and the price each man paid for his fortune. If you enjoy uncovering the darker truths of history, please like the video and subscribe. Now let's see who truly got rich in the Middle Ages and what it cost them. In the medieval city, filth was everywhere. Streets overflowed with waste, rivers ran brown with disease, and the air itself could kill. Yet someone had to deal with it. Someone had to face what everyone else refused to see. They were called gong farmers in England, fossoyeurs, vidangeurs, or gravediggers elsewhere. Their work was simple: to clean the pits beneath latrines, the cesspools beneath castles, and the sewers that ran under cities. By night, they climbed down into the darkness with buckets, shovels, and ropes, breathing through cloth soaked in vinegar to dull the stench. Some worked knee-deep in human waste for hours, scraping and hauling it out by hand. It was disgusting, it was dangerous, and it paid better than almost any other common trade, because no one wanted to do it. A single night's work could earn them as much as a mason made in a week. Cities paid them extra for speed and secrecy. They were allowed to live tax-free, sometimes even under royal protection, because they kept the cities livable. The job came with risks beyond smell. Fumes could suffocate them in minutes. Sometimes the walls of cesspits collapsed, burying them alive in filth. They carried torches for light, but too close to the methane, and the tunnels could explode. Death by fire, in a pit of waste. The final irony of a job that saved others' lives. Yet these men knew their value. They walked the streets when others slept, and even nobles stepped aside when they passed. Their stench was their shield. No one dared approach them. And while most lived humbly, a few grew wealthy. The waste they collected was sold as fertilizer, carted to farms outside the walls for profit. They literally turned excrement into gold. In the daylight, people cursed them. At night, they worked beneath the city's feet, keeping its filth from drowning it. They were invisible, reviled, and necessary. The quiet proof that even the dirtiest job could buy comfort in a world where survival stank of decay. In the end, they weren't heroes or villains. They were the backbone of civilization, covered in mud, breathing rot, and earning more than anyone ever imagined for it. If the church sold salvation and the merchants sold goods, one profession sold fear itself. It was the most hated, the most avoided, and one of the best paid: the executioner. He was the man everyone needed but no one wanted to see. He lived outside the city walls, forbidden to share wells or sit in taverns. People crossed the street when he passed. Yet his house was often larger than most merchants, and his table never empty. The job was simple: to end lives, but the responsibility immense. Executioners carried out hangings, beheadings, burnings, and tortures ordered by law. They were trained, precise, and expected to perform without hesitation. A clumsy strike was a sin. A clean death was an art. For every life he took, he was paid in silver or goods. Some earned 5 to 10 times more than a craftsman. They received free lodging, food, clothing, and tax exemptions. And for certain noble executions, a single swing of the axe could buy a year's comfort. But there was another side to their fortune: the black market of death. Executioners had access to what others didn't: human remains. In a world obsessed with healing through superstition, parts of the executed, fat, bones, blood, were believed to have magical or medicinal powers. They were sold secretly to apothecaries, physicians, and alchemists. The fat of a hanged man was said to cure arthritis, his blood to bring strength. It was macabre and profitable. Some executioners became local legends, feared and respected in equal measure. Franz Schmidt of Nuremberg, for example, recorded over 350 executions and lived comfortably as an official of the city, his daughters marrying into wealthy families. He was a killer, but also a man of law. Their wealth came with silence. They could never escape what they were. Children avoided their touch. Priests hesitated to bless them, and even in death, they were buried apart from others. Yet, for all the disgust they inspired, no city dared to mistreat its executioner, because without him, justice could not exist. In the hierarchy of medieval trades, the executioner stood alone, reviled by God, paid by kings, and proof that in the Middle Ages sin was still one of the best businesses to be in. War was the engine of the Middle Ages, and for some, it was the quickest path to wealth. When kingdoms clashed, the powerful didn't just fight for honor, they sold war. The Middle Ages gave birth to a new kind of warrior, the mercenary. These men didn't kneel to kings or pray to causes. They fought for whoever paid more, and they charged in gold. In Italy, they were known as the condottieri, captains of private armies who rented their services to cities, dukes, or even the church. They commanded thousands of soldiers, negotiated contracts like businessmen, and built their own fortresses from the profits of blood. Some, like Sir John Hawkwood, became richer than the rulers they served. He was paid not just with money, but with land, titles, and the right to tax the villages he conquered. For the right price, these soldiers could change the outcome of an entire war, and when peace came, they often made sure it didn't last. A restless army needed work, and chaos was profitable. They raided, extorted, and protected cities that could afford their loyalty. It was protection money disguised as chivalry. Behind them, an entire economy thrived. Blacksmiths forged endless weapons, tanners made leather armor, and horse breeders supplied the cavalry. For every night on the battlefield, dozens of workers earned their living from death. War fed the poor as much as it enriched the powerful. The church condemned killing, yet blessed crusades. Kings preached peace, yet built careers on conquest. And in between stood the professionals, men who turned violence into a career, men who understood that in a world built on faith, nothing paid like fear. The mercenary's life was short, but it could be golden. Some retired as nobles, building castles on the bones of the wars they'd won. Others died forgotten, their wealth looted by the same hands that once paid them. But the principle they lived by would outlast them all. Loyalty was worth nothing. Gold was worth everything. The medieval world claimed to worship God, but it was war that truly filled its coffers, and the men who profited from it wrote their names not in prayers, but in blood. In the late Middle Ages, the most powerful men in Europe weren't kings or knights, they were merchants. They didn't conquer lands, they conquered routes. From Venice to Bruges, they moved goods worth more than gold, silk, salt, and spices from the east. Each ship carried fortunes, each voyage a gamble between riches and ruin. Merchants spoke more languages than most priests and knew more about geography than most generals. They built a new kind of empire, one that ruled through debt. In Italy, merchant families like the Medici, the Pazzi, and the Fugger of Germany turned trade into power. They created the first credit systems, allowing princes to wage wars without touching their treasuries. When kings needed soldiers, they borrowed. When popes needed cathedrals, they borrowed. And when debts couldn't be paid, merchants took what mattered most: land, ports, or silence. In the bustling ports of Genoa and Florence, gold flowed like blood. Ships left carrying wool, returned with silk, and along the way carried information, the most precious cargo of all. A clever merchant knew the next war before the soldiers did, the next famine before the peasants starved. They turned foresight into fortune, but their wealth came with danger. Merchants lived between classes, too rich to be commoners, too common to be nobles. The church distrusted them. Usury, lending with interest, was called a sin. Yet kings depended on it. So the same priests who condemned greed by day borrowed secretly by night. Trade became the bloodstream of Europe. Flemish cloth, German metal, African ivory, Chinese silk, all passed through the hands of men who never lifted a sword, yet decided the fate of nations. Some merchants even purchased titles, marrying into nobility and buying coats of arms. But others stayed in the shadows, preferring gold to glory, too. They financed crusades, bribed bishops, and built dynasties that would survive long after their kings were gone. By the end of the 14th century, one truth was undeniable. The battlefield no longer decided who ruled. The balance sheet did. Power had changed hands, from those who shed blood to those who counted it. In every kingdom there were men who didn't fight wars or dig in filth. They simply told others how much it all cost. They were the royal administrators, treasurers, tax collectors, and advisors who touched every coin before it reached the crown. While kings stood in glory, these men worked in silence, counting, calculating, deciding. They knew exactly how much gold a war would drain, how much land a famine would ruin, and how deep a kingdom's debt would cut. Knowledge like that was power, and in the Middle Ages, power always came with a price, or a bribe. The royal treasurer could make or unmake fortunes with a single signature. Some manipulated the accounts, siphoning gold into private chests. Others charged fees to delay tax collection or to forgive debts. The line between administration and corruption was thin and often deliberate. But their influence was immense. A treasurer who managed a kingdom's finances could become richer than the nobles he served. Kings depended on them and feared them, because in a world without banks, these men were the banks. One of the most powerful figures in France, Enguerrand de Marigny, began as a simple clerk. Through accounting and cunning, he rose to control the entire royal treasury. He wore fine clothes, dined with princes, and built his own castle. And when he finally fell from favor, he was hanged by the very system he had helped fund. Across Europe, the story was the same. Behind every strong ruler stood a quieter man, armed not with steel, but with ink. He was the one who knew the secrets, who owed what, who paid whom, and where the money really went. A king could not hide his debts, but his treasurer could bury them. Their lives were comfortable but precarious. One mistake, one rumor, and their heads could roll before the next audit. And yet, men still sought these positions, because nothing in the Middle Ages paid as much for silence as royal service. They were the unseen hands that fed the crown, balanced the wars, and silenced the truth. History calls them advisors, but in truth, they were the hidden kings, the ones who ruled from behind the throne and counted gold while others counted bodies. The Middle Ages were never just an age of kings and crusades. They were an age of work, brutal, dangerous, and at times, unbelievably profitable. The monk who sold salvation, the merchant who owned fleets, the soldier who sold his sword, the man who shoveled filth for gold, each of them played their part in a world that measured worth not by birth or honor, but by survival. Money flowed through churches, battlefields, and sewers alike, and wherever it flowed, someone learned how to catch it. In the end, the Middle Ages weren't as far from us as we like to believe. They lived in systems of hierarchy, corruption, and ambition, the same forces that shape every era that calls itself civilized. The richest people of that time didn't always wear crowns or command armies. They simply understood a timeless truth, that wealth doesn't belong to those who deserve it, but to those willing to do what others won't.